AI is reshaping businesses, and ignoring it could leave your industry disrupted. I'm Rajan, and this is Pivotal Clarity. We talk to those building or using AI, founders and engineers with real world experience. Our aim is to cut through the hype and see where AI is truly making an impact. If you're a business or following tech trends, these conversations offer clearer insight than most of the press. Let's get into today's episode. Welcome to this episode of Pivotal Clarity podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. I always enjoy our conversation, and I wanted to sort of bring you to the podcast because we've been talking about AI on and off on how things have changed, what it means for product management and like what it means for startups and founders from India. I thought the audience would greatly benefit from the insights that you have, the conversations that we've had in the past. So, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Rajan. I'm super excited to be here. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. I mean, you've got an incredible audience of followers who listen into insights that you share, and just happy to be here.
Yeah. So for the listeners, let me do a quick introduction of Arvi. And Arvi, I'd like for you to add in wherever I have may have missed out. So Aravind Krishnaswamy, as Arvi is known, is the director of product and strategy for AI at Cisco's contact center and customer experience business unit. He joined Cisco through an acquisition of a startup, a customer experience startup called CloudCherry, where he led the product and engineering as part of the founding team. I mentioned, we call him as Arvi, and he's been in both the startup as well as the public company sphere, including Intuit and Support.com. And he's seen at least 2 acquisitions and 2 IPO. Arvi and I overlapped during Intuit around 2015. Is that right, Arvi?
Yeah.
And as well as when both Arvi and I worked side by side during our mobile startup days around 2010. Now, Arvi is leading AI projects within Cisco and has a unique vantage point on AI as the incumbent, which has the distribution, the data, and also a newfound resolve through its new fund to be quite ahead in this AI platform shift. Arvi, anything that you'd like to add that I might have missed?
No, that's a great summary. I think, for me, this journey has been a mix of different startups as well as multiple large enterprises, and seen multiple waves of technology that have driven things. I think mid 90s, I was at IISc working on Param, sort of saw evolution of what I'm going to call old computer. And from there, the wave of the internet, the hype, companies that emerged through it, and companies that the same ideas and how they progressed literally a decade later through down to now. And AI, I think, represents the biggest shift that I think we've all seen. Enough people have spoken about it, but I think we're at an exciting point where I think there are specific things around new computer, old computer, where I think there are opportunities today, which irrespective whether you're a big company or a small company or a startup, I think there are things to take advantage of that could start to really shape the companies of the future.
So, Avi, let me start with this first question. It may be a little personal one. Your website where you write your thoughts is called args.in, args0.in. What is it about? Why? What does it mean?
Argos was the dog of Ulysses from Homer's Odyssey. And there's a beautiful story of how Ulysses went off to the war, came back after over a decade, and how his dog was waiting for him and recognized him when he came back just before the dog passed away. There are different variants of that ending, but there's a more beautiful one that I'd like to imagine really happened. For me, it was personal as our dog, who passed about 4 or 5 years back, was very close to us, close to our heart. So it was Argos, just, dogs and how they're a part of our lives. And a bit of a geeky reference to Arg Zero, which is self, and our own understanding of ourselves and what it means in our journey.
So, Arvi, if we were to start a startup idea now in the new platform shift of AI, what type of ideas would you work on and why would you pick those?
That's probably one of the toughest questions people are thinking today. So you put me in a bit of a hot seat here, but one way to think about it is go back to other similar big waves that happened. Uh, Both you think of mainframes, and back then you had Steve Wozniak and others who were part of hacker houses, tinkering with different things with hardware, connected with Steve Jobs, and found a way
PCs.
to solve real consumer problems. And you think of the early 2000s, the emergence of the internet. I was actually at IISc there, sitting across this Iris Indy machine, and I got to see NCSA Mosaic for the first time, and we realized it was world changing. But to go from that opportunity of, hey, there's the internet, you could connect all this to solving real business problems, Amazon really led the pack there, starting with one single category of, hey, everyone wants books. And they're finding it hard today to find the books that they want. And how could you solve that well with the internet? And from there, they expanded category after category, solving to become a far broader market play. So I think across these, sometimes a broader vision, but solving for a certain category where you can deliver outcomes really well, I think is key. And the contrast to this that I'll give you is sometimes you can have a number of different ideas. And in the 2000s, I was living in Menlo Park and I used to order my groceries through a web van. It's not that web van was a bad idea, but it didn't last more than a year back then because the
Yeah.
complexity of all the things that it took to get to product market fit were too high. But a little over a decade later, you could be in Bangalore, you could be in a small town anywhere in the world, in a places where you can use an app and get things delivered home. So sometimes these great ideas take some time to pan out. So making careful choices about areas that you can get traction, figuring out which are the right ones where you're getting enough traction that you can double down on. So if you're a large enterprise, understanding the broader patterns of where there's traction and areas that you could double down on where you have more leverage. Or if you're a startup, figuring out where you can accelerate the key levers that will give you the product market fit, acceleration, and then broader leverage, I think, are key at a point like this.
You talked about leverage, but then there is also this element of timing, right? Like you said, Webvan back then did not work, but now you go to any small town or city, you'll find that there is an Instacart or there is a Swiggy, and it's basically same Webvan, like 10 or 15 years later. So timing is also key. So how do you actually make those choices around timing and key aspect of leverage?
No, it's a great question. And I think, look, there's the business outcomes that we want to solve for ultimately. And I think those still need to drive our focus and not let technology drive choices. Because sometimes with AI as an example, we spend a lot of time talking about technology, but we don't talk about the business problems that we're trying to solve. But we're also at a phase where there's a balance of the two. I'm going to take a couple of minutes to share an example here before I talk about this. I'm going to go back to literally mid 90s. While I was working with Param and later at grad school in the States, I worked on grand challenge problems like meteorological, like weather prediction, which involves using large data sets from all around the world and running complex meteorological models to predict the weather. Now, these prediction models were there even in the mid 90s, using high performance computing to do. And you can think of next token prediction as further evolutions of that in various ways.
Yeah.
Those models back in the mid 90s were based on finite difference and finite element analysis, calculus, right? So it was complex calculus based models that scientists had come up with, which were being implemented in code, a lot of it in Fortran, and then later in C and C++ as it was set up with PVM, MPI, huge complex clusters. So that was an old computer. And today we talk about Gen AI and, oh, it's hitting adoption issues, it's not always accurate, and we have all these problems.
Yeah.
And the new computer is faced with these challenges of, I don't know if I can rely on it. I don't know, the outputs are trustable, hallucinations. So the analogy I want to pull us back to here is example of Mangalyaan, India's own moon, Mars mission,
Mm-hmm.
and things that we did in the 90s. Calculus can only take you so far. With calculus, you can send a spacecraft to the moon or to Mars. But if you want to find the right landing spot, where you want your rocket to go land at the right place and land without crashing. It's all probability. Calculus cannot
Okay.
solve the problem well.
Yeah.
Today, probability is used to determine where to land, how to land, and all those details. So, even today, in the real world, if you want to solve a problem well that is so critical, it's probability that is able to solve for it well for you. So, the stochastic nature of those systems, as long as they have access to the right data sets, is still able to get this to you at higher fidelity than traditional calculus based systems. With weather forecasting, you could get by with calculus because it, at occasions of rain and so on, there's some level of fidelity. But when you're landing something on the moon or on Mars, you still need probability. So part of the generational shift that we're seeing here, to me, foundationally, is how software is getting built. We have traditionally always been in this mode of, hey, someone is going to go talk to all the users, gather requirements, come back. Requirements may not be accurate. They come down, you build some software. Engineers may not have understood what logic to plug in. Finally, it gets tested. You don't know if that's right or wrong. It gets out to the market. And then you realize this huge disconnect.
Hmm.
In the last decade, we've all spoken about how we've got to be more data driven as product managers. We've got to be more data driven in thinking about how to do things. What are the insights that you want to gain from the market, customer feedback, all of this to think about what is the right thing to build, funnels through in different ways. And part of the generational shift that I think we're seeing here is how data itself is being used to drive the logic of the system. And learning how to use this new computer is part of the evolution that I think we're on.
So are you saying that, so for somebody to get the answer right from a leverage and a timing perspective, here you're dealing with things which are you use the word stochastic. I mean, when we use words like stochastic and probability, we lose half the audience. What you're saying is something which is not very predictable. Like when you deal with environment where a lot of unpredictability is there, so you cannot use things like calculus, but you have to use things like probability. And most of the software that was built was actually in an environment where many things were very, very well sequenced as a logic, and that's what you were calling as calculus. But like now, when we have to actually build systems, the leverage and the timing would be more around thinking about how you use math that will help you deal with things which are unpredictable.
That's right. And until the probability based systems have access to enough data and the right data, they will not be as mature as systems where they're entirely programmed with logic. But as they have access to the right data sets and as they're applied to the right problems with the right expectations of fidelity and accuracy, those will improve. We've seen the shift now in the last year or two, where we've moved from AI being mainly used to assist humans with different things towards more autonomous ability to help understand problems, to help solve problems, and to take action on its own. And part of this evolution here too is where, with access to the right data sets, applied to the right business problems, and within the right boundaries of either organizational knowledge or personal knowledge, and various other types of actions that you try to enable, these are starting to happen. So today, whether you see a broad range of applications of AI, where it's using different data sets, either within an enterprise for consumers that use it to help them with writing, it helps them with making PowerPoints, it helps them with creators, the number of t-shirt designs that you can make. I think that there is a very strong proof point when it comes to creators. Generative AI's ability to give creators plurality of choice, where earlier anything that you were trying to create and you could maybe come up with two or three, you can easily come up with 25 very, very quickly, get to that 95% point as a creator, and then choose how you want to go from there. And it could be that the last 5% is still something you do yourself, or maybe you do the whole thing from scratch. Plurality of choice widens your horizon and lets you go broad, almost like a design thinking principle of, hey, go broad before you go narrow. And it's letting you go far broader as a product leader, as a designer, as a strategist, and how you would approach that.
So a designer first becomes a curator rather than a creator, right? Because he has hundreds of options, and then he's picking which one of the ones that are generated. as a design that he wants to sort of suggest, instead of saying, okay, how do I draw the outline, and how do I actually color the pixels, and so on and so forth. So
Absolutely.
are we why don't we make this a little more concrete?
Yeah.
Like whether it is probabilistic or whether it is deterministic, when a founder is building a startup or an idea, there is this element of going to the market, and then there is competition. And also from a shift perspective, there is this discussion around saying, does the David have the advantage, or the Goliath have the advantage? And how do you actually think about it, and like make it concrete with an example for, like, let's say, an Indian founder? And that's why I asked you the question saying, what would you pick? Where is an opportunity for an Indian founder to win, and how to think about from a generative idea startup perspective?
So I think if you're sitting out of India, often at times one of the biggest challenges is distribution and proximity to the actual users of the software. So
Correct.
for an Indian founder, I would say optimize for considerations around these two, because these otherwise get in the way. So proximity to who the buyers and users of your software are. So distribution with respect to how you can get to them easily, and how you'll understand whether you're meeting their outcomes, and to be able to quickly iterate with them is, to me, singularly an immediate focus. So if you're building a Gen AI based software, for instance, for creatives, it could be in the movie production industry, it could be generating PowerPoints, it could be helping people with generating websites from things that they have. Then here, you want to optimize for how are you going to get to those users, and work a little backwards from that aspect of the journey. And then really optimize for the fact that there's so much of noise out there today that you really want to be able to deliver an outcome for them very, very, very tangibly and quickly.
Let
So
me interrupt you there. So when you say distribution and you need access to that, and if you're an Indian founder and you use the examples of movies and making creatives, what is your view on India versus US in terms of geography for customer market?
for certain types of markets, for instance, especially enterprise, here aspects of go-to-market, business reach. If you're sitting out of India, then establishing that is critical. And as I think many founders have discussed, having people in the US to build that bridge and link is incredibly critical to ensuring that you succeed, because those strategic partnerships are incredibly important for having that leverage. But once that aspect of distribution is something that you have a bit of a handle on, then I'd say from there, figuring out for whoever uses your product and tries it for the first time or for the first couple of weeks, you want it to be something where they can immediately see benefits. Because Gen AI is also at a point today where a lot of people have tried it, and there's a sense of, hey, you know what? I don't know if it's going to fully meet my needs. So you've got to pick an area where you can move that needle from, hey, it's 80% there, 90% there, to 98, 99% there, or ideally offer something a little more turnkey for them. And we can talk a bit more about that, but I think that here's an element where I think for Indian founders, the opportunity to depart from some traditional thinking on, hey, I'm building a SaaS application, may be the opportunity there, since there are enough SaaS products, enough dashboards, enough of those today. And today, programmatic interfaces, the ability to interface it with low, no code platforms, give enterprises the flexibility of choice, but also have a way in which you can land where someone's able to quickly get started and see some business outcomes out of the product. So if it's like movie production, let's say you pick documentaries as an example. And it's someone who's able to quickly come in there. They have some existing assets. With those existing assets, you're able to give them 20 different types of documentaries that they could right away publish and start to use. That's very tangible. And if there is a 1, 2, 3%, I'd say that as AI continues to mature, in my opinion, to solve for the business outcome, we shouldn't hold back on a service-based model. If Indian founders have the leverage to partner with other services companies in the ecosystem who could take it through to the 100% in some form, and that's a workable business model, I think that fundamentally breaks that no software mode towards leaning in a construct where it's a service at the end of the day, and software drives it. It could be humans training AI, AI training humans, and these constructs will improve, and various examples of how the humans are interfacing with AI that will help drive continuous improvements to take you from that 97, 98 closer to enabling AI to do it more autonomously.
That's a very fascinating area. So one of the things that, I also covered in a report that we as Upega had published at the beginning of the year, saying that the software and the services market is going to be pretty big, and then India has a big advantage. One of the thing about the evolution of that market is I think it's companies like Accenture and TCS who are far ahead in leveraging that trend. I think startups, I'm yet to see them pick that and really build on that. I'm completely optimistic about it. I know that it is bound to happen, and it's an area of advantage for founders. But just in India, startup founders adopting that, there are few and far examples at the moment. But that's a great opportunity, right? That's a great opportunity in terms of leverage. That's a great opportunity in terms of solving some of the issues that you said with respect to go to market.
I think it's a huge opportunity. I think people have tapped into India in the past for labeling services, but there's a creators economy that's opening up, but there's also a curators economy that in effect is opening up.
Well, I love that term, curators economy. I don't think anybody's written something like curator economy.
And that's where I'd like to see it as literally a curator's economy that's sort of opening up here, where I think the job creation opportunities here, where I think new jobs will start to get created, where there are people who will be able to come in, look at 20 different types of things that are possible to offer inputs. Because today with AI, you can get from 0 to 90, 95% on a lot of this very quickly. One part of it is literally the curator's input on which one to go with. The other part of it is literally then the part of going from 95 to 100. Go from good ideas through to completion and to explore a wider range of them is increasingly now getting more easier. And then where this is getting automated far more too is on personalization. And today there's a multitude of choice, right? Personalization at scale that is now starts to be possible. I think the interesting part of where that starts to break down some barriers, in my opinion, is concerns around ethics, diversity, data sets. What if these are models trained only on data in the US? And I actually think personalization can start to break that frontier. And in my opinion, AI there starts to become a lot more personal with respect to your personal AI and other AI that starts to then protect the knowledge of the creators and the curators because it's their own in that economy and how they can work together. So for founders here, I think the key part here is thinking about it as a service and how can you enable someone to just get the outcome that they want. Today, people go out and hire various employees to do different things. And what if it's almost like a BPO type model, right? Indian companies have gone in there and said, hey, we've got this whole building, I'll move the whole building over, run the processes, run all of it. And I think in the globalization play here, enabling an entire function and using AI first to do it. And those who figure out the balance of this human in the loop with this and how it matures, I think is key. But picking a few segments where you can deliver an outcome really well. Literally the Amazon book equivalent, if you're a startup, picking that kind of a category. And if you're an enterprise, figuring out the access to data sets that you have, leverage and levers that you have, combining that with areas of the market that are seeing traction to optimize for it are, I think, the two things to look for.
What would be a guess for you on what that book-like category is today?
To me, it's the creator economy today for the next 12 months, just given that with Gen AI, it's solving well for creators today. It's giving them a plethora of choices. But to go from there to getting something done is still a quantum of work. But this category is somewhat clearer, where you're selling into usually the units of a company, where there is some level of tolerance for inaccuracy, as long as the curator and the creators involved are able to look at that with leveraging how Gen AI broadens the opportunity while leveraging human capability and capacity in a non-threatening way, where you're really up-leveling human ability there. And I see that as being very tangible. It up-levels human capacity. It improves business outcomes and customer experience, respect to who's involved. And I see that as one category. And the second is things involving automation, where people are looking at old PC and new PC, how these come together, and
I
bringing.
thought you would go for the developer, redefinition, from a full stack engineer to an AI engineer, where they are using things like Cursor and Claude Sonnet and writing a lot of code.
Yeah.
You don't see that as in a very similar way as is the curator opportunity. I think the curator and the generative AI is like a natural fit.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on developer?
No, you're right. No, there's a natural fit between the two, and there's significant overlap between the two. I think the only difference to me, though, is while in the underlying stack, there is overlap. From a business outcome perspective, there's slightly higher tolerance at one end, where if the creative that goes to you telling you about, hey, Upeka's got a new podcast or this thing that's coming up, it's slightly off. There's a bit more of tolerance to that versus a developer who ships software, which suddenly brings a bunch of servers around the world down, right? Or
like
causes a security leak, right? So I think that balance is important. So for the next 12 months, I think the creator part is a little clearer. There's no doubt that the stack, and as it matures, will evolve how we build software. But we also have to keep in mind that building software today touches many parts of the stack, right, at a very fundamental level. So underlying infrastructure, operations, data centers, security, and all of that. And there's actually an opportunity there, which people aren't looking at as much. It's a little unsexy, but to look at the more boring areas of the stack on quality, monitoring, reliability, and all of this. And one example I tend to think of sometimes even like Browser Stack, right? One of the startups that emerged out of India. And it took a fairly boring problem of browser compatibility, but solved it incredibly well. So I think there's an opportunity there. I also think of Little Eye Labs, right? At a time when a number of people were building mobile apps, Little Eye Labs came out with a building block where everyone else was digging for gold. They built a spade. Sometimes being able to solve for platform infra that enables an AI gold rush might also be a good place to be.
Then, for an Indian founder, you need to be in places where the stacks are layering and coming together, right? So if you earlier spoke about like in an Indian founder's opportunities is in making sure that they access distribution, and distribution needs global presence. And if you're focusing on building on the stack part of it, then you need to be in the right places. So are you saying that these are two different set of opportunities? One is on the application side and the other one on the infra side? In fact, what I was going to say is that I love the boring framing. I say that when someone asks me, what are you focusing on? I say vertical boring applications, AI applications, right? So where others are not coming and incumbents are not spending time, and therefore you can find a space or a spot where you can go and build a solution and then become really big before the incumbent catches up. And that's the only way to sort of beat incumbents into building large businesses. Otherwise, if you are in a sexy space, then a hyperscaler could come and say, I will make this infrastructure component available for free, or they'll throw billions of dollars on GTM and then can crush a startup. So how does a startup pick, right? The application or on the infra side?
Yeah, you're right. So this new PC is kind of coming together, right? I tend to think of the large language models as almost like a chip, right? And the chips themselves, there are many types of chips, some of it commodity, many different variants now in place. We're starting the evolution of short-term memory, long-term memory coming together, short-term memory with various options, RAG, and so on, and how this is getting managed. And the pieces around the new PC are coming together. There's definitely opportunities there in that stack. There are challenges with respect to go-to-market, partnerships, distribution. For an Indian founder sitting here, you build something, and yes, it could be an item there. It's a tricky choice. But I think since we have seen examples both in the Valley as well as in India of some of those startups getting picked up, there will be choices larger companies have of solving those problems while solving broader problems. And I think there are opportunities there, but the path isn't necessarily entirely clear. At the higher order layer, the challenge is while this new PC is still coming together, what problems can you solve well? And I do think both matter and both will continue to evolve.
So this whole old versus new, if I were to sort of shift the gear and look at it through the lens of a product manager, right? How does things change for them? How do they have to think about, like, building products? What's the role of gathering requirements, like you said, like having customer empathy, and then what is the role of user experience, and how does this platform shift change paradigm for product managers?
So, like we saw, I think with early days of personal computing, early days of a lot of these shifts, early on, these things are very expensive, right? So the cost of AI at this point is still very high. Some of this will go down over time. But given the cost of AI, Gen AI overall, making very careful choices about where you can deliver outcomes and where value lies, what the proof point is, and how you can show measurable progress is important. So, anchoring on what the business outcomes are, how you will measure it, anchoring in close partnership with your co founders or technical leaders in engineering to be very pragmatic about what can be solved well today. And that definition, both from outcome perspective, requirement perspective, and seeing it all the way through, and sequencing of how you get to those markers that will guide it, are the hard choices. If you go back to the Amazon example, anyone can put up a website that lists a bunch of books. One part of the complexity is ease of experience, the UX, making it easy to come in, find books that they want, the catalog broad enough. Am I sending it to the right people? When they come in, do they find what they want? Are they able to search? Are they able to pick? Going through the ordering flow. But then all the other operational mechanics too, where this alone doesn't solve my entire problem. It comes down to sourcing, logistics, delivery, replacements, right? So thinking of it end to end and figuring out for the category that you're going after, even if it's narrow with a broader vision, how you solve for that end to end, I think is key. So with Gen AI, given the current limitations that it has, what can it solve well today? And how can you land in the market with something differentiating, where in the middle of all the noise, you still have something where the value prop is clear, someone who tries it gets to that point of value, and then you're able to expand from there, irrespective of which category. I think this is key, whether you're a startup or an enterprise, to get very, very clear on this. And don't forget the fact that access to data is still a very key pivotal factor here from a strategic level standpoint.
So, Arvi, are you investing in general, or you're investing in this space? And if you're investing, how do you actually think about opportunities?
So for me, I'm actually mainly looking at the unsexy. And the reason being, I think these have the most longer term leverage at this point. And I think when you look at a 3-4 year horizon, it's a lot of those unsexy areas that I think will start to matter more. I think on a 12-24 month horizon, we'll see various ranges of applications. And then we'll see a way where a lot of these will consolidate. A number of these, though, will start to be breakthrough companies, but that'll be a very small percentage. But I think the key when a new technology emerges to see it through towards the business outcomes that matter is shaping of a lot of those little unsexy areas and how they come together. Because without it, the promise will not be met. And I see those areas of when you have 100,000 different options that could be put out, what represents good quality? What represents good experience? What are all the pieces around it that need to enable that last mile to come through? It's in that unsexy that I think a lot of opportunity lies, while a lot more of attention today is placed on that. How do you do that 90% with an application? And I do think that that matters as well. And whoever lands that part will own the distribution, the marketplace, the central points of a platform that have leverage. But I also think that this part could have significant strategic leverage depending on how things go. So I think both are relevant.
How do you think about the moat question? Is it even relevant
To be honest with
from a
you,
startup founder?
I don't have any good answers here for this. I think the speed of change we've seen in the last few years has been so much that who really has any answers? We thought it was LLMs. LLMs are commodity today. NVIDIA is the only one who has immense
Yeah.
storage. Every other aspect of the stack, there are so many
Yeah.
more pieces that it feels like access to data sets, and the LLMs themselves are commodity. And if you ask me, I think it's who owns the relationship with the end consumer that has most leverage. Because I foresee a future where, as job shifts start to happen, people will protect their knowledge, people will protect their abilities, people will protect their capacities that exceed AI. And when they start to protect their capacities that exceed AI, it'll be some version of a personal AI that will be the interface in how that gets regulated. And it's just human nature. And I think those boundaries will start to form. So those boundaries and the boundaries at a geopolitical level, I think, are two that may affect the moat question a little bit.
How do you keep up with all the changes in AI? Who do you read? What do you read? Where do you hang out?
I actually don't keep up that much, to be honest with you. I mostly, like I'd say, like once every couple of weeks. I try not to. I'm not too active on most social media. Every couple of weeks I look at research papers. I look at startups that are gaining traction. I look at enterprises and broader strategies that they have across the different sources. I have a local setup. I have an agentic framework in place with multiple agents for me that do a lot of this research, a lot of the curation, and they serve up for me information that I'm looking for. So, sort of a little AI doing a bit of research for me and serves it up periodically.
Tell me a little bit more about that agentic workflow and what does it mean and why did you pick that?
Part of just tinkering to stay close to the latest of what AI can do today, for me, is also just adapting the latest products, staying at the bleeding edge, and continuing to use them to also know where we are and what is real. And so I have an agentic framework sort of running personally where it mines data from Twitter, different sources, looks at different research papers, curates it, puts it together, tracks those, uh, collates and summarizes that for me. And that's kind of mostly what I read. And then I
Got
use
it.
that to decide if I want to dig a little further. So
What are some of your favorite AI tools that you use in our day-to-day life?
Cisco's AI products are amazing. And those are what I use day to day. Across Cisco's platforms, things that are woven into all the software that we build and use.
Which ones do you use personally?
So Cisco AI Assistant today is integrated across the entire portfolio, across Splunk, across WebEx, and use it on a day-to-day basis for crafting messages that I send, use it to look at summaries, action items, various things that I need to do every day. And then at a personal level, I just play around with the newer frameworks that are in place, the newer models, experiment with little things that I do even for my daughter. So for her birthday, I use Gen AI to make a little game for her, a little playing card game. And I asked her for the favorite things she likes to do. And I came up with a little Sunday fun day thing where I use Gen AI to come up with little visual cards, like little playing cards with pictures of like you're going to a science museum, or you're jumping in muddy puddles, or we're going hiking together, or teaching our dog a new trick, and generate them into like about one card for every Sunday of the year, and put those together. So I keep trying to use it just for curiosity and to know what's possible, and applying it just to day-to-day things that I do outside of work. Uh, as a maker, creator, and figuring out how ideas come to life, it's another way of staying in touch.
Anything that you think that we should have talked about in this episode that we didn't cover yet comes to your mind?
The only thing that comes to my mind is a little bit of data and geopolitics, sovereignty, and some of that. And I think that continues to, I think, be an open, unclear question. Sometimes the startups, you think, hey, there's always this question of, was it a need for a WhatsApp for India, right? And many startups think that. And would you want to build products for India or not? And
Like
I
the
think
Twitter for India or the Facebook of India.
right.
They are the Facebook and Twitter.
Exactly, right. So I think there's a lot of that open question. I think potentially the opportunity that shifts this a little bit is when you think AI as a service, because access to large data sets, access to people who can drive those outcomes, and helping you refine your product can enable it, but price points are a factor. That's the one thing that gets in the way a little bit there. But that apart, that ability to run that loop end to end, where you have access to large data sets, access to being able to deliver those outcomes end to end, with human in the loop for labelers, curators, creators, you name it. You actually have access here today, which can then let you not have to worry about some of the other complexities, but it needs investors who are willing to look at this with that lens of there is an opportunity to incubate, grow this here, and then you could take it anywhere. And just the fact that given the diversity of data, there can be opportunities to have an AI equivalent for India, just because the data sets are completely different. So I think there's one part we didn't touch upon, but I think that's one which I suspect there are enough people already having conversations about.
Awesome. Arvi, this was such a great conversation. Thank you for taking the time, and
Please.
thank you for being on this podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Always a pleasure.
That's it for this episode of Pivotal Clarity. This is an Opeka podcast. Opeka is an accelerator for global Indian founders building AI software companies. We're exploring the fast-changing world of AI together with our listeners. If you like this podcast, you can find more on our website and other popular podcast apps. Subscribe if you want to keep up.